As a mother with a young child, you had no chance at all. The people in the striped pajamas who were fellow prisoners tried to tell older women to take the hands of the little kids, to carry the babies, to give the mothers a chance to survive. Because if you were with a child, you were dead immediately to the gas chamber. There was no hope at all. When they arrived there, and of course, they get off these boxcars, and first of all, a lot of people are already dead because a lot of young children traveling for 5, 6 days without food and water, packed together so tight that you can't sit down. A lot of the older people and many children died on the way, so you're standing packed into a boxcar for days, and people next to you are dead. When they arrive and they open, finally, the doors on these boxcars, people fall out, and they're screaming and shouting, and bright lights to make sure nobody escapes. There's dogs barking and German soldiers with bayonets and guns, and these strange apparitions of emaciated-looking people in striped pajamas with shaved heads who are telling you where to leave. You had brought any little something, just, give it to them. And these people are then rushed along this built-up kind of platform. At the end of the platform, as happened to the man I'm talking about, and his sister, his mother, his father, they were separated. And his father and he survived, his father survived for a few more days. His mother and sister were murdered immediately.
Good afternoon, it's Brent, Holland. This afternoon, Kasztner's Train, the true story of Rezo Kasztner, unknown hero of the Holocaust. This afternoon, I'm Brent, Holland. Our guest this afternoon, Anna Porter, was born Anna Skiffy in World War II, Budapest. Anna Porter and her mother left Hungary in 1956 to escape the increasing Soviet presence. Porter was appointed an officer of the Order of Canada in 1992. In 2003, she was awarded the Order of Ontario. She has also been awarded honorary doctoral degrees from Ryerson University, St. Mary's University, the University of Toronto, and the Law Society of Upper Canada. This is an important book. It is my pleasure to welcome Anna Porter to the show this afternoon. Hi, Anna. Thank you for joining us.
Hi. Yeah, well, thank you for inviting me to be on your show.
Thank you so much. Can you give us an overview of Leo Kasztner's story?
He lived at a time when there were precious few heroes and a lot of victims. It's World War II, it's the Holocaust, it's the persecution of the innocent. And he determined that he wanted to do something to help people. He focused his attention on his fellow Jews. He was himself a Jew. In a most unlikely series of meetings with Adolf Eichmann, who was, well, I was going to say architect of the Holocaust, but he was not smart enough to be the architect. He was certainly a chief worker in the Holocaust machinery established by Adolf Hitler. He managed to negotiate with Eichmann the release of almost 2,000 people from war-torn Hungary at a time when Jews were already being murdered in death camps all over Poland and elsewhere, but mainly in Poland, and Hungarian Jews were being sent by boxcar to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where most of them were murdered. He was able to negotiate a deal, pretending, somehow convincing Eichmann that he, Kasztner, a little guy from a town in then Eastern Hungary, that he represented some kind of great world Jewish interest, which, of course, he didn't. Not only did he not, but there was no such organization. However, Hitler wrote about such an organization, and Eichmann was in no position to disbelieve him. So he negotiated the release of these people, plus about another 15 to 20,000, depending on whether you take the German numbers that are closer to 20, or the Hungarian numbers that are about 15,000 people via Strasshof in Austria. And these people were known in the German archives as the exchange Jews, meaning they were to be exchanged for goods. And during his trial in Israel years later, Eichmann referred to them as Kasztner's Jews. He negotiated that they should be put aside waiting for a possible deal for them to be exchanged for more bribes. This didn't happen, but the fact is that most of them survived.
That's
terrible
fantastic.
Circumstances, but they did survive. Kasztner himself was not so lucky. After the war, he emigrated to Israel, and he was accused of having been a collaborator, and he was murdered.
Can we talk about the devil incarnate, Adolf Eichmann? But before we do, just let me read this quote of Eichmann's from your book. And folks, if you're just joining us this afternoon, we are indeed speaking with Anna Porter. Anna Porter's written a seminal book and a very important book. Many of you know about Schindler's List, of course, the Spielberg film, and the true story of Oskar Schindler. Well, there's another true story. There are several true stories of real-life heroes from the Holocaust, and this fellow's name is Rezo Kasztner. It's an important book because it documents a hero's true story up against the epitome of evil. Now, let me read this quote of Adolf Eichmann, and then we're going to tell folks who Adolf Eichmann is. There's a whole bunch of folks out there who might be uncertain who this, as I call him, the devil incarnate is. And this is a quote when he first meets Kasztner. "Do you know who I am? I am the Commissar of World Jewry. It is I who decides how many live and how many die. I am charged of cleansing the streets of Europe Jews." Adolf Eichmann. Can we talk some more about him?
He also was a small-town fellow. He was not very successful in his working life. He was an Austrian. He joined the Nazi Party for something to do, but also because he kind of liked the uniform. He worked his way up to Lieutenant Colonel. He was in charge of the Jewish office. He viewed himself as the main expert on what the newspapers in Germany referred to as the Jewish problem. He prided himself in being able to emigrate several hundred Jews from Germany in exchange for all their worldly goods and belongings. When he arrived in Hungary in March of 1944, he had already had considerable experience at his favorite occupation, which was murdering innocent people. When Rezo Kasztner first met him, he had quite a reputation, and during all of those meetings, Eichmann, who put his revolver on a desk in front of him. This is a very beautiful part of Budapest, on the Buda side up in the hills, which is where his office was, a lovely view of the Danube and lots of birds singing outside and everything. It's springtime, and he had his gun in front of him. At any moment, he could have shot Kasztner at any moment without the slightest fear of any kind of repercussion, because Kasztner was a Jew. You could shoot Jews with impunity. Kasztner had nothing but his wits.
Can you describe Eichmann's relationship to Himmler and Himmler's relationship to Hitler? I'm just trying to establish the hierarchy for folks that are unfamiliar with it.
Difficult because one of the ways in which Hitler's government worked was to divide and conquer. Eichmann was below, he was a lieutenant colonel. He was below Himmler, who is very close to Hitler. Eichmann didn't have the status even of a full colonel at this time, but he still had the power of life and death over people, which he exercised with impunity.
Okay, we're talking with Anna Porter this afternoon. She's written a great book called Kasztner's Train. Kasztner's Train is the story of Rezo Kasztner, unknown hero of the Holocaust. It is also a winner of the Canadian Jewish Book Award, and that's something that you must be very proud of.
I am. I was really very pleased to get that award. The book was also awarded the the Canadian Writers Trust Nonfiction Award, which really stunned me. In fact, it surprised me so much. I had actually left the event. This is an annual prize-giving ceremony, there's cocktails and everything. And I had gone, and it never occurred to me that the book would win. And one of the organizers ran after me and said, well, you might want to stay a few more minutes. I can't say that. Anyway, it did, it won the award. I was stunned. Delighted, really,
Absolutely.
Because I worked really hard on this, I believe. When I started writing the book, Brent, I did not have any, I hadn't decided whether this guy was, in fact, a hero.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of, I really wanted to do him justice, and I felt that the awards kind of helped in that sense. Mm-hmm. I actually sent half the award to his granddaughter.
Oh, that's wonderful. The book, Kasztner's Train by Anna Porter, who we're speaking with this afternoon, reads like a film. It is very well written. It is a story. It is not just pure documentation where numbers are thrown at you or an academic has written the book. This is a story, and it's a true story. It will really, really put you right in Hungary. And that's where I want to go right now. I want you to take us into Hungary, where Mr. Kasztner lived. What was it like just before the war and then the war conditions during the war?
Well, Hungary became an ally of Germany, mainly because the Hungarian government wished to get back 2/3 of its territory that had been taken away at the end of the First World War by the Allies. That was the main reason why Hungary joined with Germany, and indeed it did succeed in getting back some of the territory, but as an ally, the Germans stayed out. Life for the Jews up until March of 1944 was not as pleasant as it had been before. It certainly was not dangerous. Unlike Poland, where Jews had already been rounded up and were in ghettos or murdered by 1944, in Hungary it was still safe. In fact, it was sufficiently safe that Jewish refugees and Christian refugees from Poland were coming into Hungary up until March of 44, which is when Hitler decided that he needed to take a much firmer stand with his ally, and the German army marched in. The Hungarians had a very bad war. Hungarian Jews had a worse war. Traveling in Hungary now, people talking about their memories of that time. I mean, I haven't heard one single person not have a traumatic memory who survived and has any recollection of that time, was old enough to remember. But for Jews it was okay until 44, in just 3 months, with the help of the Hungarian gendarmerie and police and their own former neighbors. They were rounded up, almost 500,000 of them, and sent to Auschwitz-Birkenau.
Let's talk about Auschwitz and the protocols, because that's a story that is largely unknown to the mass population.
2 young men, one of whom actually ended up in Canada. He ended up teaching in Vancouver at the university, escaped from Auschwitz. This is 2 young men who were from Slovakia, and they had been rounded up earlier than the Hungarians, escaped from Auschwitz and attempted to get word to, in fact succeeded in getting word to Hungarian Jewish leadership and ultimately to the Vatican, and as many of the Allies, of course, as they could. But they wanted everybody to know that Jews were being annihilated, that they weren't in labor camps, that they were not just isolated, but in fact they were systematically murdered, which, of course, the Allies already knew. People did not know. Their hope, one of these people was Rudolf Ruba, V-R-B-A, and his book is readily available. He was an extraordinary guy. He had hoped that by getting this information out, that the next victims would be the Jews of Hungary, that this information would make a difference to everybody, that somehow the killing machine could be stopped, and some, perhaps thousands, perhaps, of Hungarian Jews would take up arms and resist, as the people in the Warsaw Ghetto had done. At least that they would not get into the trains that took them to their deaths.
The protocols were received with mixed, what's the word I'm looking for, mixed reception. Essentially, some people believed it, some people didn't want to believe it. That
is true. But I mean, a lot of the Hungarian, nothing had happened in Hungary. They found it impossible to believe that suddenly, they knew about Poland, but they just assumed that, well, that's over there. Over here we're safe. It seemed improbable. The leader of the Hungarian Jewish community in Budapest, Mr. Stern, he played bridge with the governor. The Hungarian Jews were not living in isolation. They were very much part of their community. They were journalists, they were lawyers, they were actors, they were doctors, they were involved in the government, they were engaged in industry. They were not small, isolated communities. It seemed totally impossible to them to believe that from one day to the next there would be orders to take everything they've got and march them to their deaths. It seemed unacceptable. The thing is that if someone were to tell you that this is going to happen to you next month, you wouldn't believe it. It seems you don't believe it. It's, in many ways, none of us believe in, a lot of people have trouble with global warming.
Well, you don't have to convince me. I'm originally from Montreal, and I'm an Anglophone there. Now, folks, Quebec is not Nazi Germany. I want to get that straight right now. But it took coming to Ontario to make me realize how Bill 101 is a racist law in its essence. And I don't want to get into that now. I want to stay on the Holocaust, but I completely understand what you're saying because people circumvent it every day. They just go around it. But it is legislated right there in Quebec that the free use of the English language is prohibited. You are not allowed. There's a whole bunch of things I can get into. Restrictions on sending your kids to school, restrictions where you can speak English, and I'm not kidding, and et cetera, et cetera. So I understand exactly what you're saying. And it doesn't happen overnight. It edges in, and people just say, oh, well, it'll just be for a short period of time, and then it'll disappear. So I understand. Once again, I just want to reiterate, Quebec is not Nazi Germany. That's not what I'm saying. I was surprised to learn that Kasztner's story crosses many names that we've associated with helping to get Jews to safety. For example, Oskar Schindler, Karl Lutz, and somewhat of, I guess you could say, the most famous name from the camps, Anne Frank. I was wondering if we could talk about how it crossed over to Oskar Schindler and Karl Lutz.
Well, Schindler was trying to save people in a factory that he set up. He was a Sudeten German, and he set up a factory that had once belonged to a Jewish owner, but of course Jews weren't allowed to own anything in that part of the world. And he employed as many people as he could. Now, where they crossed paths is twofold. First of all, Schindler traveled to Budapest by train to meet with Kasztner. Kasztner gave him funds that he had collected, mostly from fellow Hungarian Jews, to help him with what he was doing, feed and clothe people he was employing. And he, on the other hand, was giving information to Kasztner and hoping that he would reach members of the rescue committee, there was a rescue committee to try and save Jews from other countries, to let them know that in fact these work camps were not work camps, they were extermination camps. He knew that from first-hand experience. For those of you who have not read the book, it's all there in his own autobiography. He refers to Kasztner as the bravest man he had ever met. They didn't like each other, in fact, personally at all. The one guy's a great, big, hulking German. He was well over 6 feet tall and a heavy drinking guy. And Roger Kasztner is a small build, bespectacled, dark-haired, pale-faced, non-drinker. Their first dinner together was not very successful. and their communications, generally speaking, were fairly chilly from Kaszner's end. Karl Lutz and Kaszner did become close. Arius Lutz himself went up to see Eichmann a number of times to try and negotiate with him to allow him, Lutz, to give Swiss passes to the Hungarian Jews who otherwise would be killed. And he was himself an extraordinary heroic figure, oddly enough, rather criticized by his own government subsequent to all of these horrific events for having handed out these papers. They said, well, what are we going to do with all these Jews when they arrive? Well, rather than giving him a medal for bravery in extraordinary circumstances, so he too didn't have a pleasant end, but at least he was not murdered.
Anne Frank?
Anne Frank, really, there was no direct contact with Roger Kasztner, his sister-in-law, who met Anne Frank in one of the camps. By then, Anne was very ill, and it was fairly close to when she died.
Now, you mentioned something very horrific. What are we going to do with all the Jews? Now, this was something the Western world didn't step up to the plate and do. And this is one of the main reasons which led to the Holocaust, because in the beginning, Hitler just wanted to get rid of the Jews, get them out of Europe, but no countries were willing to take them in. Certainly, there's a wonderful book written by two Canadians called None Were Too Many about Canada's role in taking Jews in. And that is a direct quote from Mackenzie King, who was the Prime Minister during the Second World War. None is too many.
In answer to the question of how many Jews should we allow into the country, sir?
Exactly.
There was. None is too many.
Can we talk about that and perhaps the Bermuda Conference as well?
There were a number of international conferences where the main topic was that the non-Nazi nations of the world could we do something to accept refugees from Nazi Germany, people who would otherwise get murdered, and nobody really bellied up to the bar. There were several conferences. The Australians, for example, they would maybe take 1,000 because they had no racial problem in Australia, and according to the Prime Minister, they didn't wish to start one. Puny efforts, nothing significant, and in fact, ships escaping the Nazi horror headed towards Palestine. There were Jews in Palestine wanting to accept their fellow Jews who would otherwise be killed. Many of these ships were turned back. Some were sunk by the British. It's an ongoing horror story, and in the films of the documentaries of the ships arriving here and being turned away, and ships trying to get into the United States being turned away. The United States was just as ungenerous as Canada. There was no effort. Even going back to your question about Rudolf Vrba wishing to warn people to run, to escape. Well, where was there to escape to? Which is one of the horrors of this story that, makes you reflect upon what could have been done and what.
I want to stay on this line of thought, but I just want to tell folks that we're speaking with. Folks, if you're just joining us, we are speaking with Anna Porter. Anna Porter is a Canadian writer, award-winning writer, Canadian Jewish Book Award. The book is called Kasztner's Train. It's the true story of Rezo Kasztner, unknown hero of the Holocaust, and it's riveting. The book is wonderful. It tells the story. It's going to pull on your heartstrings big time, as well it should, because the idea is to make such an impact that this cannot happen again, or try and pray it doesn't happen again. The Holocaust. The same thought pattern that we were talking about. We were talking about Jews coming into Palestine. I would like to talk about Hitler and the Grand Mufti. This is another story a lot of people don't realize, with the Grand Mufti. And I would like to talk a little bit about that and Zionism as well, because Rezo Kasztner was a Zionist, and people have this boogeyman ideology that's what Zionism is. boogeyman stuff, and I would like to clarify that as well. Is that cool with you?
Sure.
I would like to talk about the Grand Mufti in the sense that he was Hitler's best friend. Well, I wouldn't say best friend, but he was certainly had a lot of influence on Hitler, preventing Jews from arriving in Palestine, and also the Grand Mufti wanted to put an extermination camp in Palestine and get rid of all the Jews.
He was the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Amin al-Husseini. He was an absolutely virulent anti-Semite. He did not want to have any Jews at all in what he viewed as the Arab lands, and that included Palestine. He was behind numerous attacks against the British who were in Palestine. It was a British territory. It was a mandate. We won't get into that. Too much history. He became a good friend of Hitler. There's some lovely pictures of him and Hitler that I saw, photographs, documenting their friendship. He offered Hitler assistance. He offered to set up his own army, and which he did do, Palestinian army at work during the war, and he encouraged as much as possible the complete annihilation of Jews. The Führer apparently rather liked him. Not everybody liked him. He was a tough guy to like, but Adolf Hitler liked him. 1941, I think, may have been when he settled in Germany as Hitler's guest, and he was frequently in the company of both Hitler and Himmler.
What kind of influence did he have on Hitler? Because here you've got Kasztner trying to get Jews out to Palestine. Hitler wants to get rid of the Jews at this point, and yet the Grand Mufti's having quite an influence on Hitler.
I think that it didn't make a whole lot of difference, although there was a week or two when Eichmann and one of his associates went to Palestine to negotiate with the Jews, but also negotiate with the Arabs to see if they could get one or the other side on, or, fun and profit. This is long before Eichmann got to Hungary. By 1943, there was really no question that Hitler was all set to murder all the Jews of Europe, and that Eichmann was his happy associate or instrument in that effort. I find really quite strange is the British behavior during that time. Now, I do understand that, as they pointed out in their documents, there were a lot more Arabs than Jews. And as the war years wore on, of course, this became more and more of a problem, and they really wanted to be at peace with the Arabs. And one way to be at peace with the Arabs is not to allow any more Jews into Palestine. Their own behavior in sinking ships with women and children on board, refugees, or turning the ships back to the German harbor, knowing that everybody on those ships would be murdered, is really questionable. But it's exactly what the Grand Mufti wanted and thought would be just fine. He was all for murdering every Jew possible. Did he play a role in the British? I mean, that's really more the question, to my mind. Make the British behave in ways that they otherwise would not have. In other words, did they become less humane in terms of dealing with the Jewish refugees than they might have otherwise been, had it not been for him and his threat?
Do you think that perhaps the Allies should have bombed the camps to shut them down?
I do. But again, looking at all the available documents on that, I mean, even Ben-Gurion was not in favor of bombing. Ultimately, he started off thinking, that's what should happen. But there were still people alive in Auschwitz. On the other hand, you listen to the stories from survivors, assuming you can bear to do so, and I promise you it would break your heart. The stories I have heard still keep me awake at night. But listening to the stories of what it was like.
Can I
tell you one of those stories?
Yeah, I think it's important.
You meet people even here now. I spoke yesterday in a synagogue in downtown Toronto, and one of the women there had been in Auschwitz. One of the men had been in Majdanek. Some of them are reluctant to talk, but the stories you hear really, the punchline is, we would rather they had bombed and killed us, because every day was so painful. Just surviving was not good enough. Let me tell you about a little boy. He was about 13. I met him by then he was a major general, and he had been a retired major general. And his family, including his little sister, were stuffed into boxcars and sent to Auschwitz-Birkenau. Birkenau is where most of the Hungarian Jews went. I encourage everybody to see it just once. You never forget the experience of seeing it. When they arrive there, and of course they get off these boxcars, and first of all, a lot of people are already dead. A lot of young children traveling for 5-6 days without food and water, packed together so tight that you can't sit down. A lot of the older people and many children died on the way, so you're standing packed into a boxcar for days, and people next to you are dead. So when they arrive and they open, finally, the doors on these boxcars, people fall out and they're screaming and shouting and light to make sure nobody escapes. There's dogs barking and German soldiers with bayonets and guns, and these strange apparitions of emaciated-looking people in striped pajamas with shaved heads who are telling you where to leave if you had brought any little something, just, give it to them. And these people are then rushed along this built-up kind of platform. At the end of the platform, as happened to the man I'm talking about, his sister, his mother, his father, they were separated. His father and he survived, his father survived for a few more days. His mother and sister were murdered immediately. As a mother with a young child, you had no chance at all. Some of the people in the striped pajamas who were fellow prisoners tried to tell older women to take the hands of the little kids, to carry the babies, to give the mothers a chance to survive. Because if you were with a child, you were dead immediately to the gas chamber. There was no hope at all. You can imagine his memories. You can imagine how he felt. His father survived for somewhat longer, but he too succumbed in the end, and he was the only member of his family to survive. I met a lot of people who were the only members of their families to have made it. There is a survivor guilt that I came across, not only in Hungary, in Germany, in Toronto, in Vancouver. I talked to people who feel guilty that they are alive because they too went to the camp and their beloved sister, mother, father, brother were killed, and they have remained. Some of them try to bear witness to what happened, to keep telling the story, but so many of the survivors now are very old, and I fear the time will come when they will no longer be able to tell their tales, and these are some of the most moving stories.
That's why books such as yours are essential. Essential.
Well, thank you.
We're speaking with Anna Porter, folks, and the book is called Kasztner's Trains, the true story of Renzo Kasztner, unknown hero of the Holocaust.
Brent, can I please say one tiny little thing?
Yes.
I don't want to leave you and all your listeners in a state of misery. Can we just say that there's a great love story in the middle of this book? Not all terrible. There is a love story.
Please, absolutely.
Let's leave people with a little bit of hope.
Absolutely. Wonderful idea. Let's talk about the love story.
Okay. Do you want me to?
Go ahead. Let's dive right in.
Thank you. There is a great love story, truly, in the middle of this book. In fact, it runs through the book. Renzo Kasztner met and fell in love with Hansi Brand. Now, Hansi was married to somebody else, and Roger was married to somebody else. So, this is not an altogether black and white guy. This guy, had some gray shades, but they did fall in love during the time when Kasztner needed it most. Hansi was there to guide him and help him. She taught him to chain smoke because he was not really a smoker, but Eichmann was. He wasn't sure how to deal with the fact that this man was always shouting and marching up and down in his office, and Hansi taught him how to march up and down and try to look powerful despite the fact that he was scared witless, and chain smoke. In fact, another thing that came up during the Eichmann trial, Eichmann said that he had always believed that Hansi was the brains behind Kasztner. She was there during the trial, when there was the libel trial. Kasztner sued somebody for libel who had accused him of being a collaborator. And she was there. When I interviewed Kasztner's daughter, she said, well, you know, my father was an attractive man and he had a lot of affairs. I also interviewed Hansie's son, one of her sons.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't bring it up, he did. You know, he said, well, it's well known, my mother loved him. Through those times, there was a little bit of nookie.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's certainly intertwined and weaves its way throughout the book, and it's right there. Love always finds a way, beschert, as they say.
Yeah, well, I was trying, you know, in talking to you, I know what a downer this is. Periodically, I talk to people who are halfway through and are saying, oh my God, you know, I've got to put it down and walk away from it because the grief is so overwhelming. Mm-hmm. Well, there is a love story. It is. The fact the trial is itself a whole other story, the trial in Israel and what happened there to Kasztner. But he was ultimately exonerated, and even though today he's still a controversial figure, as I keep hearing throughout Canada and the United States and Poland. Recently, I was in Warsaw. The book was launched in Polish.
Oh, Mazel Tov.
Yeah, it was really quite something. It was launched at the Singer Festival in Warsaw just 2 weeks ago. It was really quite a thing. The Singer Festival, you gotta see it.
That's wonderful.
In a city without Jews, it's a Jewish festival.
Incredible.
There are 5,000-6,000 people. They're all, celebrating. A lot of them all dressed up. They're all, they're Gentiles. They're dressed up in Jewish gear, or what they think is Jewish gear, and they're selling Jewish tchotchkes in the streets. And there are klezmer bands, including a klezmer hip-hop band.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, very
big
cool.
deal.
Very
so anyway.
Cool. Yeah. Let's talk about if it could ever happen again.
Yeah.
You think it could?
You know, I am particularly sensitive to anti-Semitism.
Me too.
And I see it. I see a lot of it here. I see young men and women. I did anyway when I was there last in Budapest, marching in uniforms that look very much like those old newsreels of Arrow Cross uniforms. You see the fascist slogans, and I've seen them, and the desecration of cemeteries, and the ultra-right populist nationalist parties gaining more adherents as the economy doesn't do so well, and people are looking for someone to blame, and there's always a way of finding the other. And unfortunately, I'm using somewhat extreme examples, but you can go to a cocktail party in downtown Toronto or downtown Vancouver, and somebody will say something anti-Semitic. Mm-hmm. And I always think you've got to stand up and say, no, I'm not going to stand for it.
Right away. You can't let it fester and grow.
Yeah, absolutely. Even if it's unpleasant, even if your host or hostess finds it difficult. Yes, I think it's always possible, and particularly in at times when things are not going so well for people, they're looking for someone to blame. And as ever, handy, there are always the Jews. Mm-hmm. Even, in countries where there's anti-Semitism in countries where there are no Jews. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. Do I see the danger? Yes, I see the danger.
Israel. Do people have the right idea about Israel? We hear about, in Canada, right here on campus, last year I attended a hate fest against Israel. And every year they have the Israel apartheid stuff going on. How do you feel about that?
Well, you can imagine how I feel about it. I'd feel a lot better about it if there was a week against the Sudanese rape and pillage, but there isn't. I'd feel better about it if the United Nations was a little less biased. I'm perfectly willing to engage in dialogue with anybody about Israel. But to have anti-Israel sentiments expressed exactly as if they were anti-Semitic sentiments, which is very often what the case is.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I find that.
What scared me last year is right here at Laurentian University on campus, they had invited somebody from Palestine House to come up and talk. And I asked him point blank, I said, do you endorse the purposeful targeting of women and children with Hamas rockets? And he said, yes, it's resistance. And no one out of 100 people in that classroom, including the professor, who was a Jew himself from Montreal, who organized this debacle, I can't even put words to it, said anything. And when I made note of that, nobody offered a word of opposition except myself. And I was ostracized for it. I was threatened after class. I was accosted. It was not a pleasant experience. You
Personally were accosted by people who had been in the audience?
Mm-hmm. As far as I know, they were not members of Laurentian University. I filed a complaint with the university and never heard anything back from it. Nothing. I contacted the press here. Nobody from the press one person from CBC emailed me and told me to take her off my email list.
Come on.
I'm not kidding. I am not kidding. So, anti-Semitism is alive and well. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. It was an important show. It's an important book, Kasztner's Train, The True Story of Rezo Kasztner, Unknown Hero of the Holocaust. Amazing woman, Anna Porter, the courage to write this book.
Thank you, and thank you for the courage to have me on.
Let's see if I get accosted today.
Okay. Okay, bye-bye.
God bless. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Anna Porter joined us today. We were speaking about her book, Kasztner's Train, The True Story of Rezo Kasztner, Unknown Hero of the Holocaust. I'm Brent, Holland. Thank you for joining me. See you next time.